What is going on, world? I am the Hungarian experiment. And the other day, I posted up a video where I draw a conclusion that Vegan Gains' high-carb vegan diet can technically be considered unhealthy due to the overload of fructose metabolism that the liver has to go through on a daily basis, which can possibly lead to fatty liver disease, heart failure, and even diabetes. If you guys are interested, any links to any videos or scientific studies will pop up at the top of your screen here, or you can find them all in the description box below. But the one thing that I discussed in that video is how Vegan Gains and I can literally pull scientific study after scientific study out of our asses, just refuting each other. And that is what this video is about. Scientific research. Now, I always love reading the comments after I discuss anything related to a vegan type of diet because people get very dedicated to their views and their opinions, and I find this just absolutely fascinating. So today we're going to respond to a comment where someone included some scientific data. So Gerbeck S commented, peer-reviewed science states that eating animal sources of protein is extremely bad for you. The World Health Organization currently outright states that processed meat is carcinogenic. The excess carnitine and choline in milk, meat, dairy, and eggs produces TMAs that feed bacterial growth in our gut and flora, whose metabolic byproducts leads to diabetes, cancer, etc. As a matter of fact, meat is as effective as straight up table sugar in causing data. Fuck it, here I'll link you some actual studies, but Google the rest for yourself. And then he includes 5 scientific studies there and concludes that with, by the way, eating beans, nuts, seeds, veggies, and fruit have proven effects on mental, physical, and intestinal health. I also agree that eating lots of carbs with little or no fat is not a good idea, but being plant-based absolutely is. So the first thing that I want to point out here and discuss, and something that I've noticed occurs a lot when vegans leave these types of comments, is that it has absolutely nothing to do with the topic at hand. My video was about high-carb vegan diets, and what does he do? He discusses milk, dairy, eggs, and meat, which are all high in fat. So the first thing he does, he switches the whole topic, which just pisses me right off. Now, typically I would just ignore this type of comment because it has absolutely nothing to do with the topic at hand and the points I'm making in this video, but let's just play along here. And secondly, he agrees with me, but no, not at the start of his comment, but at the end. Like, you man, seriously? You leave this comment, piss me off by changing the whole topic at hand, and then you decide to compliment my views and agree with what I had to say. This is not how you go about having an informed discussion with someone. If you wanted to challenge my views, but you didn't, that's fine. But you disrespect me, talk down to me, and then you try to compliment my views and say you agreed with everything. Like, what is the point of your comment? But anyways, let's take a look at some of the links you left for me. So the title of the first link that you reference is Choline Diet and its gut microbe-derived metabolite trimethylamine N-oxide exacerbate pressure overload-induced heart failure. This study discusses the supplementation of choline and TMAO on mice done over a 12 to 15 week period. So how did they test this study to get these results? Mice were fed either a controlled diet of 1.2% containing choline or a diet containing 0.12% TMAO starting 3 weeks before surgical transverse aortic constriction. The mice were then studied for another 12 weeks after this transverse aortic constriction. So what is aortic constriction? Transverse aortic constriction, or TAC in the mouse, is a commonly used experimental model for pressure overload-induced cardiac hypertrophy and heart failure. TAC initially leads to compensated hypertrophy of the heart, is often associated with a temporary enhancement of cardiac contractility. Over time, however, the response of the chronic hemodynamic overload becomes maladaptive, resulting in cardiac dilation and heart failure. So basically what they are doing is they are feeding these mice a certain diet for about 3 weeks, or supplementing this mouse's diet with the same type of chemical compound that has the same similar reaction in the human body. They then cut open this mouse, restrict one of its heart valves to induce heart failure, and then they watch over the next 3 months to see if this product or this chemical compound helped to increase the rate of heart failure. The heart in these mice are going to fail either way. So to draw the conclusion that an increased choline diet can lead to heart failure is just a little bit of a ridiculous conclusion in my opinion. So if you do your research into TMAO, you will find that DMB, which is a structural analog of choline, inhibits microbial TMA formation in mice and in human feces, which reduces plasma TMAO levels after carnitine supplementation. It is found in some balsamic vinegars, red wines, and some cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil and grapeseed oils. So yes, you can draw this conclusion that carnitine, which you get from meat, dairy, and eggs, once again having to do nothing with high-carb vegan diets, can lead to higher levels of TMAO and choline in the body. And the results from mice with restricted heart valves has found that during the 12-week period where their hearts were failing, that increased choline levels help to increase the rate of heart failure. But if you supplement your diet with red wines, basic balsamic vinegars, and olive oils, you can completely reduce or inhibit this. Boom! Conflicting evidence found. And what did you expect? Me to put a whole paragraph? Me to write a whole book inside your little comment box there? You really think that's going to be effective? This is not how you go about having an uninformed, educated discussion with someone. Post 5 links, one of which is, in my opinion, completely ridiculous. Now, I don't want this video to go on forever, so I'm not going to discuss all of the 5 links that you posted there. I'm not here to start a fight, and I'm not here to bore the shit out of the world, but I did read through about 85 to 90% of the data you posted, and I even went a little further. I want to show, as I did in your first link there, that a lot of scientific studies contradict each other, and how I discussed in my other video that if you go watch the sugar-coated documentary, that they display how a scientific doctor was making discoveries and claims in Europe in relation to how sugar intake affects the body negatively, and the Sugar Association in the States was paying a Harvard professor to purposely create conflicting data to skew results, which of course got support by the media. The results from scientific studies that were paid off by political interests and corporations from the 60s, 70s, and 80s are still circulating around now, and a lot of studies being done now are based on conclusions from those studies. So we have tons of information, conflicting data from each other. Now the second link you posted, I decided to take a look at one of the 3 scientific researchers who were involved in that study. And his name was Neil Baynard. After searching through several of the studies he was involved with, I found this. You are what you eat, or are you? The challenges of translating high-fat fed rodents to human obesity and diabetes. So here we have a scientific researcher in one of the studies that you claim backs up your opinions and views on veganism, yet in 2014, 2 years ago, he claims that although rodent models of high-fat diet-induced obesity have been used widely to study human obesity, many aspects of rodent correlation to human obesity and diabetes remains poor. Dietary modification in rodents appears to have limited translatable benefit for understanding and treating human obesity and diabetes, due at least in part to divergent dietary compositions, species and strain, and gender variability, etc., etc. Therefore, future research efforts dedicated to acquiring translational relevant data, specifically human data, rather than findings based on rodent studies, would accelerate our understanding of disease mechanisms and development of therapeutics for obesity. So basically, one of the scientific researchers in the second link that you posted doesn't agree with the standards that one of the researchers in your first link went about acquiring his data and his conclusions. Just like the meat industry and our politics, this shit is rigged, people. Corporations and government purposely created false data so that they could say, we don't have enough research. We need more data on the subject. If you watch John Oliver's 20-minute piece on scientific research, he describes how scientists are pressured to come up with eye-catching and positive results. Scientists are under constant pressure to publish with their tenure and funding on the line. John Oliver discusses something called p-hacking, where they collect lots of different variables and factors, and then they play with the data until they find something that counts as statistically significant, but is most likely meaningless.
For example, the website 538 surveyed 54 people and collected over 1,000 variables, and through p-hacking the results, was able to find statistically significant correlations between eating cabbage and having an innie belly button, drinking iced tea and believing Crash didn't deserve to win Best Picture, and eating raw tomatoes and Judaism.
So as I've discussed in previous videos, I believe we need to completely change how we conduct our scientific studies. I believe we need to have human experiments walking around this world, documenting all their different life factors while getting routine and regular testing done on their bodies, which is funded or at least controlled by the public. This way, when we want to test how a new product, a new service, or a new lifestyle choice affects the human body, we already have statistical data on these human beings going back years and years, and will continue years and years into the future. When I watch someone like Vegan Gains discuss issues in life, or he calls out people on the internet, I really enjoy the fact that he takes a scientific, researched approach. I believe that this is very important for the world and the current society that we live in. They're dealing with people who don't even want to read through this scientific research. They quickly find anything that can support their point on the topic, and then they post it up feeling justified as if they accomplished something important in their day. Until we can document all these differing life factors on a wide range of human experiments, and we manipulate our testing procedures, then and only then can we really draw conclusions on how things like a high-carb vegan diet versus a high-fat meat diet actually affects the human body over long periods of time. And no, I'm not talking about 3 months. I'm talking more about 3 years or even 3 decades. Now, just because a diet or a lifestyle choice is giving you physical results in terms of muscle growth or fat loss, it doesn't technically mean that this is the best option for your body in terms of life longevity, hormonal production, or even disease prevention. This is stuff that we still need to figure out as human beings. Alright, so real quick here, let's just cover your other 3 links that you left for me there. The third link was high meat consumption is associated with type 1 diabetes mellitus in a Ceridian case control study. If you read through this study, you will see there's no real statistical data. They used semi-quantitative questionnaires. If a mother is lacking of knowledge of food, food intake, and food density, then she may not have a great understanding of what they're reporting on the questionnaires, especially semi-quantitative data gathering. Semi-quantitative data collection means that it doesn't give you the absolute amount of the analysis in a sample. It only gives you the analytes relative to the others. So for example, it will tell you there's 3 times as much aluminum than iron in a sample, but won't tell you the exact amount of either sample. Now, this test group was done on 298 children aged 0 to 15 years old, and out of 145 of them were affected with type 1 diabetes. This was all done on Ceridian case control studies, so this was only done on people in Italy. children ages 0 to 15 in Italy with technically no real statistical data, and they also use semi-quantitative data collection. Moving on to your next link, the fourth link that you provided, the title of that link is The Effects of PCB Exposure and Fish Consumption on Endogenous Hormones. This study is discussing how the effects of Great Lakes fish consumption on PCBs, nothing to do with the consumption of healthy fish that are not infected with polychlorinated biphenyls, which is a group of man-made chemicals that are widely used in electrical equipment like capacitors and transformers. If you're trying to display the effects of fish consumption and its effects on the human body, then please don't use research results with fish that are tainted with chemicals. I bet I could find a link real quick about how certain vegetables are not healthy when sprayed with a pesticide. Actually, right here's a link and an article for you. This test is not studying the consumption of fish, but the consumption of fish that are already affected with a chemical. And the fifth link that you left is choline intake and risk of lethal prostate cancer, incidence and survival. If you take a look at the conclusion of that study, it clearly says the limitations of our study included the lack of validation of our FFQ's estimate of choline intake, our limited statistical power to examine the independent effects of the choline-containing compounds, restricted generalizability, and the potential for unmeasured confounding. Our study potential was a homogeneous group of well-educated white men, thus our results may not be generalizable to populations with different racial or socio-dynamic distributions. Yet this was not a randomized controlled trial, therefore we cannot be certain that the associations we observed were the results of intake of choline or some other nutrients or factors associated with the consumption of choline. So right there in the conclusion of that article, the conclusion of that scientific study, they are saying that they cannot be certain that the associations they observed were the actual results of intake of choline or some other nutrients or factors involved. Like what?